All right, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our live stream here on KREM 2 Plus. I'm Chief Journalist Amanda Roley, tapping in this afternoon because I want to follow up on a little bit more of the content that we received from Eastern Washington legislators and their reaction to Washington Governor Bob Ferguson's remarks on the state operating budget. The headline he gave yesterday right off the bat was he does not see a version that was either passed by the House or Senate. Neither of those versions are ones that he is prepared to sign because he has some issues with them. So I reached out to several Eastern Washington state legislators and asked what their thoughts were on his remarks and the concerns he has with it. So I want to share a little bit more of their thoughts we didn't get to share with you in our coverage last night. So who we're going to hear from, that's going to be Senator Leonard Christian. He's a Republican out of Spokane Valley. Senator Marcus Riccelli, Democrat out of Spokane, Representative Joe Schmick, Republican out of Colfax, and Representative Natasha Hill, a Democrat out of Spokane. So we've got two Democrats, two Republicans that you're going to hear from covering our area. Let's kick things off. I want to remind folks what the governor had said right off the top, right out the gate. He opened with, I'm not going to sign these versions, right? So the House and the Senate, they can pass their own versions of the budget, but eventually they have to come to a version that they both can agree on. They're not the same at this point. The governor said, both versions, there's some concerns I have. I'm not going to sign it. So what I want to do is take a look at what those initial remarks were from the governor. Take a listen.
The House and the Senate have both passed their budgets, and I want to start by saying how much I appreciate the hard work of both the House and the Senate. There are good ideas in both budgets, and I'll speak more about those good ideas a bit later. I also appreciate the many productive conversations I've been having with leadership on both sides of the aisle, and those conversations will, of course, continue. The new budget, however, is close to one that I can sign for two key reasons. First, they each pose far too much tax. Second, they both rely on a wealth tax, which is novel, untested, difficult to implement, and most importantly, for purposes of adopting a sustainable budget, will face the immediate challenge in court. The legal arguments for wealth tax are untested. The courts could go either way on this issue. It would be irresponsible to rely on untested new tax to balance our budget, particularly given the situation faced with the federal government.
All right, so again, that was the initial remarks from Governor Bob Ferguson. That last comment that he made there was in response to his concerns with the proposed wealth tax and why he doesn't feel very strongly in supporting that. All right, so when I talked to our state legislators, I asked two main questions. The first being, what are their initial thoughts on the governor's address, particularly their reaction to his two main concerns with the versions presented to him, that they are proposing too much tax and rely on a wealth tax. We're first going to hear from Republican Senator Leonard Christian, again out of Spokane Valley.
Well, to be very blunt and straightforward, I want to thank Governor Ferguson for being willing to stand up and kind of push back because that is exactly my concern. And actually, the Republicans have been saying all along that you're creating a budget on untested tax system on the wealthy that has failed in several countries. And even the employment head tax failed miserably in Seattle, but yet you're willing to make a budget based on those failed policies and expectations. And then who will be left holding the bag is not the rich, but you and I, the middle class, and even the less fortunate, the people on fixed incomes, are going to be expected to make up for those additional spendings. And so they were willing to increase spending in a time when we were in the hole. And that I have a checkbook, and I'll tell you that does not work that way. When you're in the hole, you stop digging, as the governor said, and you start figuring out what you actually can count on coming in. And for that, I really appreciate the fact that he's looking at this in a bipartisan way and saying, go back, start over, and give me a budget that I can sign. And I think that we just increased our chances for special session by quite a bit.
Okay, so I thought that was an interesting remark. So my follow-up question to Senator Christian's comments was, it's not every day, right? This is a new administration for the state, and it's not every day you hear a Republican lawmaker applauding remarks from a Democrat governor. I thought that was really interesting. So I asked him why that is, why he's coming across that way, and what that actually says about this new administration. Here's what he had to say.
I just want to say that Governor Ferguson is a smart individual. He gets it, and he realizes that you can't build a budget on hope and dreams. And he realizes that, next year we'll be back here. And when the revenues don't come in, he'll be in a worse situation than he is now. And it seems as if the legislature is picking a fight with the federal Trump administration on some of her policies in schools. And those are going to come back to bite the state. And then what are we going to do with less money coming in from the federal government? And then where's that money going to come from? I'm very impressed with Governor Ferguson to be able to do this, to point it out and say this budget is not signable, is not agreeable. Please go back and do the right thing.
All right, so there you have it. Interesting comments there. All right, so moving on, we're going to check in with the reaction that Representative Natasha Hill had to the governor's remarks. We'll take a listen here.
I think we all have real concerns, and this budget wasn't something easy to put together. While I'm not on appropriations and on the budget team, I think we all have to appreciate that if we're not looking to tax wealth in our state, when we have one of the most regressive tax systems, the only other state that's more regressive than us is Florida. We're also behind our sister states of Idaho and Oregon. Every state in the Northwest has a state income tax. That's how they're able to tax wealth fairly. So the issue we have is the wealth that's being created in Washington state doesn't just come from wealthy folks. It comes from folks showing up to work every single day. And I think if our governor takes a closer look at the decisions that are being made both on the House and the Senate side, he can find a better appreciation for why we are looking at taxing wealth more fairly in our state.
So there you have it. It sounded to me when I spoke with Representative Hill that she says, heard, we hear you, Governor, but we're digging in. She still believes that wealth tax is something that will be to the benefit of Washingtonians, and you heard her reasoning there. We're going to hear next from Senator Marcus Riccelli, a Democrat out of Spokane. He's definitely one who, when I asked for his initial remarks, he said, we hear you, and it sounds like his takeaway from the remarks from the governor was more that he kind of gave his priorities and maybe a roadmap on what negotiations across the aisle may look like going forward as we approach that April 27th deadline. So here's what Senator Riccelli thought about those remarks from the governor.
This is a period of negotiation between the House, the Senate, and the governor. I'm grateful the governor provided more clarity today on his vision for the operating budget, and is committed to a balanced approach. We always said from the beginning we needed to scrub the budget, and then we need to look at what are our key essential services to fund. And there's going to be differences as we move forward with any budget process, but I'm optimistic that we're going to continue the conversations that are important and that we can come together and make sure that Washingtonians have a strong financial footing in the future.
All right, there you have it. We're going to close out this question again, asking Eastern Washington legislators what their thoughts are about those two big concerns the governor has with the budget. We're going to close this question out hearing from Representative Joe Schmick, Republican out of Colfax. He brought an interesting element to his remarks. He, in his side of things, he is against the number of taxes being proposed in both the House and Senate. And he sees from Colfax, he mentioned, I am a border community. I see people going to Idaho to avoid having to pay those increased gas taxes. They're looking for opportunities to save a few cents, save a few bucks, and he says that it's hurting businesses. So take a listen to what he had to say.
I think the wealth taxes, is problematic because it doesn't meet the uniformity clause of our state constitution about taxation. And so I think that and one of the comments that he made is that he was worried that this would be overturned in court. And so why are we relying on that? I believe that the governor also said that he wants to minimize new investments. He would like to cut the tax load of this budget to the people of the state. He does not want to use the rainy day fund. And he's looking for efficiencies and savings. He certainly has drawn a line in the sand. That
You agree with those remarks?
Yeah, I do.
Why is that?
I think that we're asking way too much of the people.
All right. So again, those are responses from our Eastern Washington legislators of, just the initial thoughts on where the governor stands at this point. The next question I asked focused on Governor Ferguson. Really, he's wanting the state to prepare for what he says are impending future federal budget cuts. And he says the best way the state can prepare for that is to prioritize our state reserves by not touching and really putting a priority on the rainy day fund. So I asked our legislators about their thoughts. Do they agree with the idea of this being that priority, that first step in protecting the state? We'll first hear from Senator Riccelli on that rainy day fund.
I hear what the governor's saying. I do think bond ratings are important. I do think, though, that also budget stabilization accounts exist for those exact reasons, to keep us in check. So I'd be more in support of more of a kind of midpoint. And that would say, well, if we were looking to make sure government was funded for 2 or 3 months, if, some big action was taken, I would be saying, let's make sure we have enough on hand to get through a number of weeks so that we can get to a lawsuit to allow us to put some of those potential actions that would need to be challenged in the courts on a stay. But generally I've been very supportive of, rainy day fund, budget stabilization, but I also am very supportive in tough times for the constituents I represent. If we have to tap those to make sure they can get key essential services, I think we need to take a hard look at that.
And then we're going to move right along into response from Representative Natasha Hill, Democrat out of Spokane, about her thoughts on prioritizing those reserves and rainy day funds.
I don't disagree that we're probably facing inevitable budget cuts from the feds, but we're not the feds. We're the state of Washington, and we have to look out for this Washington. We're not going to be able to anticipate everything the other Washington does, but these revenue bills in particular are going to create the safety net that the most vulnerable folks in Washington are going to need if those cuts happen. And that's where I think there needs to be a little more consideration from our governor. So if we're looking at federal government putting us in an even tougher position, we need to find out how Washington is going to take care of itself and any resident that wants to live here. And we can't do that with regressive tax on property, on sales tax, that ultimately lead to us balancing our budget on the backs of the poorest and most vulnerable. What we need to do is tax the wealth that all Washingtonians showing up to work every day help create. There's no reason why folks who already have wealth are seeing gains on their wealth at the expense of everybody seeing gains on their income.
So again, Representative Hill kind of digging in to that belief with the wealth tax proposal. Final responses here, we're going to hear from Republican Representative Joe Schmick out of Colfax on that rainy day fund.
If you don't have some savings in the bank, it's that acts as a buffer for when, and I do anticipate there will be changes in federal funding and cuts. And then what? If we don't have that buffer, that ability to kind of, protect the taxpayer, protects the services in our state, then we're back here having to make decisions that probably aren't the best.
The takeaway I get hearing from the Democratic legislators is they're either open to discussion as far as prioritizing the rainy day fund and that reserve, or they dig in and say, well, there's another way to help protect the state from these impending federal cuts. I'm going to close things up with a last remark from Senator Leonard Christian, Republican out of Spokane Valley. And point blank, he says, I think that's a great, he's the same one that is applauding what the governor's saying about, he said, drawing that line in the sand of what needs to happen to make a balanced budget. He likes the idea of making this a priority and this being the way that the governor wants to protect Washington State's budget. So take a listen.
Absolutely, it's a good move. You've got to protect that. You've got to protect the state. And as he said, if we have a natural disaster and the federal government is unable to come or unwilling to come and help us, our citizens can't afford to sit there and suffer waiting. They need relief immediately, and the state needs to be in a position to give that relief. And that's how you do it, is the rainy day fund.
All right, so there you have it. Listening to two of our Democratic and two of our Republican Eastern Washington State lawmakers and their responses to Governor Bob Ferguson's address yesterday regarding the state's operating budget. We did do a full story yesterday. We also have on KREM 2 Plus right now. If you want to watch the full remarks from Governor Ferguson, you can watch that right here on the KREM 2 Plus app, and our full coverage on previous comments that lawmakers have made as well. Thanks for tuning in.